Billionaire CEO takes homeless woman as pretend bride for his brother's wedding, but then she. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain poured hard over the Manhattan skyline, streaking down glass towers and collecting in rivers along the sidewalks. Outside a late-night cafe, a woman named Mia clutched her thin coat tight around her shoulders. Her hair was damp, her stomach empty, and her future uncertain. Only 24. She had lost her job 2 weeks ago. With no family left to call and no apartment to return to, she had been sleeping in a shelter when she could find a spot, and under bridges when she could not. Tonight, even the shelter had turned her away. Mia pressed her back against the awning of the cafe, hoping to stay dry for just a little while. Inside, the hum of soft jazz and clinking glasses was a sharp reminder of a world she no longer belonged to. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed by her reflection in the window, her shoes worn through, her jeans frayed at the knees, her coat second-hand and failing to keep her warm. That was when a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The back door opened, and a tall man stepped out. His suit fit perfectly, his shoes shone even under the rain, and his posture radiated the kind of confidence that comes from power. He shook off his umbrella and glanced toward the cafe, but then his gaze landed on her. For a second, Mia froze. She was used to people looking through her, not at her. The man studied her silently, and then with a deliberate calmness, he stepped closer. His voice was low but clear over the sound of the storm. "I have a proposition," he said. Mia's breath caught. "Excuse me?" He looked her straight in the eyes. "Marry me. Just pretend." For a heartbeat, Mia thought she must have misheard. Her chest tightened, her mind racing with disbelief. "What kind of joke is this?" she whispered. The man's expression did not shift. His jaw was set, his gaze unwavering, every word measured. "It is not a joke. I am Alexander Knight. My younger brother is getting married in 2 weeks. For reasons you do not need to know yet, I require a wife by my side. Someone temporary. Someone who will not ask questions." Her pulse pounded in her ears. She had heard the name before. Alexander Knight, the billionaire CEO who dominated headlines. The man whose empire stretched from tech to real estate. He was standing in front of her in the rain, asking a homeless girl to become his bride. Mia shook her head, backing against the cafe wall. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Alexander replied. His tone carried authority, but his eyes hinted at urgency. "I will make it worth your while. Housing, compensation, a clean slate. In exchange, you play the role of my wife until after the wedding. Then we part ways." The thunder cracked above, echoing her heartbeat. Her mind flashed through every desperate moment of the past few weeks, the hunger, the rejection, the cold floors she had slept on. The word housing alone felt like a lifeline, and yet the rest of his offer seemed impossible. Mia's voice trembled. "Why me?" Alexander's lips curved faintly, though it was not quite a smile. "Because you are unattached. You have nothing to lose. And sometimes, the people with nothing to lose are the ones who can keep secrets best." The rain drummed harder against the awning. Mia hugged herself, torn between fear and the spark of hope ignited by his words. It felt insane, but so did every moment of her life lately. And there, in the glow of a cafe window on a storm-soaked night, her story with the billionaire CEO began. Mia did not sleep that night. The rain eased by dawn, but the echo of Alexander Knight's words haunted her long after the storm. "Marry me. Just pretend." It was madness, she thought, and yet the card he had slipped into her hand felt heavy in her pocket. His name embossed in silver letters, an address on Park Avenue, and beneath it a number. She had turned it over 100 times beneath the thin blanket she clutched at the shelter, her mind torn between disbelief and desperation. By morning, the city was already moving forward without her. She walked the streets with sore feet, past bakery windows where the smell of fresh bread reminded her of what she could not afford. A busker played his guitar on the corner, a song about second chances. Mia hugged her backpack tighter. She had promised herself she would never sell her dignity, never surrender to easy shortcuts. But was pretending really surrender, or was it survival? That evening, her decision was made by hunger more than courage. She found herself in front of the address on the card, a sleek tower of glass and steel that scraped the clouds. The doorman looked her up and down, hesitation flickering in his eyes, but when she handed over the card with Alexander Knight's name, he stepped aside without a word. The lobby was marble and glass, a cathedral of wealth. Mia's reflection stared back at her in polished surfaces, and shame burned through her. She smoothed her damp hair, adjusted her coat, and whispered to herself, "Just breathe." The elevator doors opened to the top floor. Inside, Alexander stood by a wall of windows, the skyline of Manhattan stretching endlessly behind him. He turned when he heard her steps, his expression unreadable. "You came," he said. Mia's voice shook. "I do not know why. Maybe I am out of options." "I too." "Or maybe," Alexander replied, "you know an opportunity when you see it." He gestured to a folder on the table. Inside, pages of neatly typed clauses waited for her signature. Mia read the first lines. An agreement of temporary marriage, binding until after his brother's wedding. Compensation outlined in figures that made her eyes widen. A private apartment, full payment of her sister's tuition, and a stipend that could carry her for months. Her throat tightened. "This is unreal." "Oh." Alexander leaned closer, his voice low. "It is practical. You give me your presence. I give you a new start. Nothing more." She lifted her eyes. "And if I say no, then you walk back into the rain," he said calmly. "And I find someone else." Mia's hands trembled over the pen. The world outside had shown her no mercy. Maybe this was not mercy either, but a bargain. She signed. The faintest curve touched Alexander's lips, not quite a smile. He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. When he opened it, the ring glimmered beneath the soft lights. Not extravagant, not the kind of diamond that screamed wealth, but simple, tasteful, convincing. He slid it across the table. "Put it on. From this moment, you are my wife in the eyes of the world. Do not forget it." Mia picked it up carefully. The band was cold against her skin, the stone catching the light. For a moment, she imagined what it would mean if it were real. But this was not a love story. This was survival. Alexander extended his hand. "Tomorrow night, there is a charity gala. You will come with me. You will act as though we have been married for months. No one must suspect otherwise." Mia slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though made for her. She met his gaze and nodded. The deal was sealed. Yet as she followed him out into the night, one truth settled in her chest. For all the rules and signatures, for all the cold precision of Alexander Knight, something had shifted the moment the ring touched her hand. This was only supposed to be pretend, but already it did not feel entirely false. The following evening, Mia stood in front of a mirror she could hardly recognize. Hours earlier, a stylist had arrived at Alexander Knight's penthouse with racks of dresses, boxes of shoes, and cases of cosmetics. At first, Mia resisted. She had never worn anything more elegant than a borrowed prom dress years ago. But under the stylist's careful hands, she had been transformed. Now she looked at her reflection in disbelief. The red gown draped perfectly across her frame, her hair swept into a graceful style that revealed the delicate line of her neck. Makeup softened her exhaustion, turning the shadows under her eyes into mystery rather than struggle. For the first time in years, she did not look like a girl on the edge of survival. She looked like someone who belonged in the glittering world above the city streets. A knock at the door pulled her from the mirror. Alexander entered, dressed in a black tuxedo that seemed to have been cut just for him. His gaze swept over her once, his expression unreadable. "You clean up well," he said simply. Mia's hands fluttered nervously at her sides. "I feel like I am in someone else's skin." You will get used to it," Alexander replied. "Tonight is a test. If you can survive the charity gala, you can survive the wedding." Her stomach twisted at his words. She was not sure which scared her more, the thought of being discovered or the thought of convincing them all. Still, she nodded. When they arrived at the ballroom, light spilled across crystal chandeliers and gilded walls. The air was filled with the scent of roses and the murmur of New York's most powerful families. As they stepped inside, heads turned. Alexander's presence commanded attention, but the whispers began when eyes landed on Mia. Who was she? Where had she come from? Alexander leaned close, his voice low enough only for her. Smile. Do not let them smell fear. Mia forced her lips into a polite curve, clinging to his arm as they moved deeper into the crowd. She repeated the instructions he had given her earlier. Stay by his side, speak little, let him lead. But the eyes, the questions in them, pressed on her like a weight. Halfway through the evening, a woman approached a matron in pearls, her smile sharp. Alexander, she cooed, and who is this enchanting companion? We have never seen her before. This is my wife, Mia, Alexander said smoothly, no hesitation in his voice. Mia's heart pounded. The word wife felt strange in her ears, heavy with meaning. She extended her hand politely. It is a pleasure to meet you. Oh, the woman's smile thinned. Wife, you say? How surprising. Her eyes flicked over Mia's dress, her hands, as if searching for cracks in the illusion. And what is it you do, my dear? Mia froze. Her instinct was to tell the truth that she had been a waitress, a girl barely holding her life together. But she remembered Alexander's warning. Do not reveal too much. So she drew a breath and said softly, I paint. For a second, the woman's brows arched in disdain. But before she could respond, another guest laughed warmly. An artist! How refreshing. At least Alexander did not choose another socialite. The tension broke, laughter rippling through the circle. Alexander's hand pressed lightly against Mia's back, steady and firm. She realized he was proud of her quick response. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions, toasts, and dances. Mia kept her steps small and careful, trying not to betray her inexperience. But there were moments brief and undeniable, when Alexander's eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. When their hands touched during a waltz, when she leaned close to hear his words over the music, when her laughter came naturally instead of forced. Later, on the terrace away from the noise, Mia leaned against the stone railing, drawing in the cool night air. The city lights shimmered below like a sea of stars. Alexander joined her, silent for a long moment before speaking. You handled yourself well tonight, he said. She glanced at him, the words catching in her throat. I thought I would drown, but I did not. No, Alexander admitted. His gaze softened in a way she had not seen before. You surprised me. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the city. For the first time, Mia saw more than the billionaire CEO. She saw a man carrying his own burdens, his own loneliness. And though the contract still hung over them, something unspoken flickered in the air. Neither of them said it, but both felt it. The line between pretend and something real had begun to blur. The days that followed the gala moved quickly, almost like a dream Mia was afraid to wake from. Each morning began with a new lesson. A poised tutor arrived at the penthouse to teach her etiquette, how to hold a wine glass, how to enter a room with confidence, how to answer questions without giving anything away. In the afternoons, Alexander arranged private dance sessions so she could glide through a waltz without fear of stepping on his polished shoes. In the evenings, she was escorted to fittings where seamstresses pinned fabric around her, whispering about how stunning she looked. For Mia, it was overwhelming. She had spent years working behind counters, scrubbing tables, and standing in food lines. Now she was walking through marble floors in heels that clicked against the stone, her reflection staring back from gilded mirrors. At night, when she lay awake in the guest bedroom Alexander had provided, she often wondered if it was all a fragile illusion that could shatter at the smallest crack. Alexander was a constant presence, though not always a warm one. He was precise, sharp, and efficient. When Mia stumbled over her posture, he corrected her. When she forgot a detail from their married history, he reminded her in clipped tones. Yet beneath the layers of discipline, she noticed flashes of something else, moments when his gaze softened, moments when his silence lingered, as though he wanted to say more but did not. Their next test came sooner than Mia expected. Alexander's younger brother, Daniel, hosted a pre-wedding dinner at the family estate. It was a sprawling mansion of stone and ivy, the kind of place that whispered of generations of wealth. When Mia stepped inside, the weight of eyes fell upon her. Relatives, Business partners and friends of the family lined the long dining table. Each face was a mix of curiosity and judgment. Alexander kept his hand at the small of her back, guiding her forward. "Everyone," he announced smoothly, "this is my wife, Mia." I. The word still startled her, but she forced herself to smile, to hold her chin high. She greeted each person politely, though she could feel the skepticism behind their eyes. Dinner began, and for a time, Mia remained quiet, letting the conversation flow around her. But as wine glasses clinked and laughter rose, one of Daniel's friends leaned forward with a smirk. "So, Mia," he said, his voice carrying just enough sarcasm for everyone to hear, "tell us, where did Alexander find such a rare gem as you?" The table hushed slightly, waiting for her response. Mia's throat tightened. She thought of the truth of rain-soaked nights, of sleeping under bridges, of hunger gnawing at her bones. But she also remembered Alexander's advice. Do not reveal what they can use against you. So she straightened her back and said, "We met in the most ordinary way. At a cafe. I spilled coffee on his sleeve. He was less than amused, but somehow that moment stayed with us." A ripple of laughter moved around the table. The tension broke, and Daniel chuckled. "Well, leave it to my brother to turn a mess into something permanent." Mia's cheeks flushed, but for the first time, she saw a flicker of approval in the eyes across the table. Alexander glanced at her, a spark of pride hidden in his expression. As the evening continued, she found herself answering more questions, weaving stories from fragments Alexander had fed her. The longer she played the role, the easier it became. For once, she was not just surviving, she was performing, and the performance was working. Later, when the guests had retired and the estate grew quiet, Mia stepped out onto the garden terrace. The night air smelled of roses and rain. She leaned against the stone railing, her heart still racing from the evening's scrutiny. Alexander joined her, his jacket draped over one arm. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said softly, "You did well, better than I expected." Mia turned to him. "I thought they would see through me. I thought they would know." "They did not," Alexander said. His gaze lingered on her face, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You are stronger than you realize." The silence stretched, filled with the hum of crickets and the distant echo of laughter from the house. Standing there under the stars, with Alexander so close, Mia felt something shift inside her. The contract still bound them, but her heart had begun to step outside its lines. And as Alexander's eyes held hers longer than necessary, she knew she was not the only one feeling the change. The wall between pretense and reality was slowly, inevitably, beginning to crumble. The morning after the dinner at the estate, Mia woke with a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had survived the scrutiny of Alexander's family, and for the first time, she felt as though she had done more than simply blend in. She had held her own. Yet the memory of Alexander's gaze on the terrace lingered, filling her chest with a confusing warmth. This was supposed to be a role, but every day, it was becoming harder to remember where the act ended and where something real began. The week raced forward in a blur of preparations. Mia found herself swept into a whirlwind of fittings, charity luncheons, and endless lessons. Alexander remained at her side, sometimes coldly professional, other times unexpectedly gentle. She began to notice the quiet gestures, how he offered his arm when she stumbled, how he shielded her from intrusive questions, how his hand lingered a moment longer on her back when they entered a crowded room. It all built toward the grandest event of all, Daniel's engagement gala, a glittering celebration that promised to be filled with the city's elite. For Mia, it felt like the ultimate test. If she could survive this night, perhaps she could survive anything. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, crystal chandeliers reflecting across polished floors. Guests in gowns and tuxedos filled the space, their conversations a hum of wealth and power. As Mia stepped inside on Alexander's arm, a wave of whispers swept through the crowd. She held her chin high, reminding herself of every lesson she had learned. For much of the evening, everything went smoothly. She smiled, she greeted, she danced when asked. The illusion held. But illusions have a way of drawing skeptics. Near the center of the room, a woman in an emerald dress approached. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were sharp. "So this is the mysterious wife we have all heard about," she said. "Tell me, Mia, How does it feel to marry into such fortune overnight? The question hung heavy, laced with accusation. Conversations nearby quieted as curious ears tuned in. Mia's stomach nodded, but she remembered the story Alexander had coached her on. She forced a smile. It feels less like fortune and more like fate. Money fades, but meeting the right person at the right time does not. Ari, a few guests chuckled appreciatively, nodding at her composure. But the woman in emerald was not finished. She leaned closer, her voice dropping but still audible. Interesting answer. Because some of us heard you were not exactly from this circle. In fact, some say you were barely keeping a roof over your head before Alexander swept you in. The words cut deep, too close to the truth. Mia's face burned, and for a terrifying moment she thought she might break. But then she felt Alexander's hand slide firmly into hers. He stepped forward, his voice steady and commanding. "My wife does not owe anyone an explanation," he said, his gaze locking onto the woman. "Her worth is not measured by where she came from, but by who she is. And anyone who cannot see that does not deserve to speak her name." A stunned silence followed. The woman faltered, her smirk fading under the weight of his words. Then, slowly, conversations resumed, the hum of the gala returning as though nothing had happened. Mia's heart pounded. Alexander had defended her publicly, fiercely, without hesitation. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she saw not just the billionaire CEO but a man willing to stand against the world for her. Later that night, away from the crowd, they found themselves alone on the balcony. The city stretched wide and glittering below, but neither of them looked at it. Alexander studied her quietly, his expression unreadable. "You held your ground," he said finally, "even when they tried to break you." Mia swallowed hard. "I thought I would fail. I thought I would embarrass you." "You did not," he said softly. "You surprised me again." The silence between them grew heavy, charged. The cool night breeze carried the scent of roses, and the distance between them seemed to shrink. Mia's chest tightened as Alexander's gaze lingered, softer than she had ever seen. For a heartbeat, the world felt suspended, balanced on the edge of something dangerous and undeniable. She remembered the contract. She remembered the rule written clearly in black ink. Do not fall in love. Yet standing there, with his hand brushing hers and his eyes pulling her closer, Mia knew that line was already breaking. And Alexander knew it too. The night of the engagement gala lingered in Mia's mind, long after the last guest had gone home. She lay awake in the penthouse guest room, staring at the ceiling while the city lights flickered faintly through the curtains. Alexander's words echoed inside her. Her worth is not measured by where she came from, but by who she is. No one had ever defended her like that. It should have been part of the act, just another step in maintaining appearances. Yet it had felt painfully, beautifully real. The following days were quieter. With the wedding approaching, Alexander grew busier at his company. Meetings stretched late into the night. Phone calls buzzed endlessly, and tension carved lines into his usually composed features. Mia noticed the change. She also noticed the way he sometimes paused when he thought she was not looking, as if weighing whether to share the burden he carried. One evening, as the rain tapped gently against the wide windows, Mia found him alone in his study. Papers were scattered across the desk, his tie loosened, his hand pressed against his temple. For a moment, he looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like a man exhausted by the weight of his world. She stepped inside quietly. "You should rest," she said softly. Alexander looked up, startled, then set down his pen. "Rest is a luxury I cannot afford right now." Mia crossed the room, her steps hesitant. "You are human, Alexander. Even you cannot carry everything without breaking." Something in her voice seemed to reach him. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with eyes that no longer looked like stone. "Do you know what it is like to be compared to someone your entire life? To be measured against a brother who always seemed easier to love, easier to trust?" Mia blinked, surprised by the rawness in his tone. "That is how you feel about Daniel?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "My family has always seen me as the ruthless one, the cold one. Daniel is the golden son, the one who charms everyone. I built an empire, but in their eyes, it is never enough. This marriage, even if it is pretend, is the only way to silence their doubts, to prove I can hold something steady, even if it is only an illusion." Mia's chest ached. She had never imagined the man who seemed untouchable could feel so unseen. Slowly, she reached out and placed her hand over his. "You do not have to prove yourself with an illusion. You are already more than enough." For a long moment, Alexander did not move. Then he turned his hand, his fingers closing around hers. The silence between them thickened, charged with something unspoken. His gaze locked with hers, steady and searching, as though he was daring her to look away. But she did not. The distance between them vanished. One heartbeat, and then another, and suddenly his lips brushed against hers. The kiss was tentative at first, almost cautious, but then it deepened, carrying all the tension, all the longing that had been building since the night of the gala. When they finally pulled apart, Mia's breath trembled. "This was not in the contract," she whispered. Alexander's expression was unreadable, but his voice was low, steady. "Some contracts are meant to be broken." The air between them pulsed with the weight of his words. She should have pulled back, reminded herself that this was temporary, that her place in his world was borrowed. But instead, she stayed. That night marked a shift neither of them could deny. The walls they had built, the rules, the signatures, the careful distance had cracked. And through those cracks, something fragile and dangerous had begun to grow. When Mia finally returned to her room, she touched the ring on her finger and realized with both fear and wonder that she was no longer pretending. And deep down, she knew Alexander was not pretending either. The days that followed their first kiss were filled with a fragile tension that neither Mia nor Alexander dared to name. They continued their public appearances together, hand in hand, every smile rehearsed for the world. Yet behind closed doors, the air between them carried a different weight. Every glance seemed to linger. Every word seemed to mean more than it should. But happiness, even the kind born in secrecy, rarely lasts without challenge. On the morning of the rehearsal dinner, Alexander received a message that left his jaw tight and his eyes cold. A set of photographs had been delivered anonymously. They showed Mia before she ever stepped into his world, sitting on the steps of a shelter, carrying a trash bag filled with her few belongings, staring out at the rain. By evening, whispers had already begun to circulate among the guests. Some said Alexander's wife was not who she claimed to be. Some said she was nothing more than a girl plucked from the streets, dressed in silk to play a part. The dinner was held at the Knight family's country estate, a sprawling mansion lit by chandeliers that gleamed like fire. Mia could feel the judgment in the air the moment she entered the hall on Alexander's arm. Conversations hushed. Eyes followed her every step. It did not take long before the confrontation came. A man in his 40s, a cousin of the family, rose from his seat with a glass of wine in hand. His smile was sharp. "Alexander, you always did enjoy your games. But this one may be your boldest yet. Tell us, is it true? Did you really marry a woman from the streets, just to parade her here tonight?" The room fell silent. Mia froze, the blood rushing in her ears. The photographs had reached them. The lie was breaking apart. Alexander's hand tightened on hers, but his face remained unreadable. "You will not speak about my wife that way," he said evenly. The cousin laughed, swirling the wine in his glass. "Wife or contract? Which is it, Alexander? Because we all know you too well to believe this is real." He turned his gaze to Mia, cruel amusement flickering in his eyes. "Tell us, my dear, how much did he pay you to play this role?" Gasps rippled across the table. The words pierced deeper than knives. Mia's throat ached, but no sound came. She wanted to defend herself, to scream the truth. But fear chained her voice. Alexander rose from his chair, his height casting a shadow over the cousin. "That is enough," he said, his voice sharp as steel. But the damage had already been done. Around the table, faces shifted between doubt and pity. The whispers grew louder, spreading like wildfire. Mia's eyes burned with unshed tears. She could not sit there any longer, not under the weight of their stares. She pulled her hand from Alexander's grip and hurried out of the hall, the sound of her footsteps echoing against the marble floor. Outside in the cold night air, she gasped for breath. For the first time since she entered his world, she wondered if she truly belonged there, or if she had been a fool to believe she ever could. The cold night wrapped around Mia as she stood alone in the garden of the Knight estate. The laughter and whispers from the hall spilled faintly through the windows, each one cutting deeper than the last. She clutched her arms around herself, her breath trembling in the darkness. For a moment, she wished she could disappear, vanish back into the city streets where no one knew her name, where no one could strip her dignity with a single cruel sentence. The heavy doors opened, and Alexander stepped outside. His expression was hard, his jaw set tight. "Mia," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Do not listen to them." She turned toward him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "How can I not? They know who I am, where I came from. I was never meant to stand beside you." Alexander crossed the stone path, his presence overwhelming but steady. "You think I care about what they say? You think I care about the photographs, the whispers, the doubt? Let them talk. Let them choke on their pride. You are my wife, Mia. Contract or not, you are mine to defend." Her breath caught at his words. "But it was a contract," she whispered. "We both know that. And now they know too. Maybe this was all a mistake." For a long moment, silence pressed between them. Then Alexander reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. He held it out, his hand firm. "Do you know what this is?" Mia shook her head. "It is the deed to a small gallery downtown," Alexander said. "I bought it weeks ago, before any of this. I was waiting for the right time. I wanted to give you a place where your art could live, a place with your name on the door. Because I believe in you, Mia. Not in who you were, not in the lies they spread, but in the woman standing in front of me right now." Her lips parted, stunned. "You did this? For me?" "Yes," Alexander said, his voice softening at last. "Because somewhere along the way, the lines blurred. What began as a contract became something more, and I cannot pretend otherwise." Tears slipped down Mia's cheeks. The world around them, the estate, the wealth, the judgment faded, until there was only his voice and the envelope in her hands. "Choose, Mia," Alexander said, stepping closer. "Walk away now and no one will stop you. Or stay, and we face them together. Not as a contract, not as a lie, but as us." The weight of the choice pressed heavy on her heart. Yet as she looked into his eyes, unwavering and unafraid, she felt the fear inside her break. For the first time, she realized she was no longer running from the past. She was stepping into a future one she could choose. Mia clutched the envelope to her chest, her voice steady even as it shook with emotion. "I will stay, but only if you promise that from this moment on, there are no more secrets between us." Alexander's eyes softened. He reached for her hand, pressing it firmly against his chest. "No more secrets. Only truth. Only us." And for the first time since their story began, Mia felt the contract burn away, leaving behind something real, fragile, and entirely theirs. The morning of Daniel's wedding arrived with clear skies and sunlight spilling over the estate grounds. Guests in shimmering gowns and tailored suits filled the grand chapel, the air humming with anticipation. Yet as the music swelled and conversations rose, all eyes kept darting to the pew where Alexander and Mia sat together. Whispers lingered, but their presence alone silenced much of the doubt. Mia held her hands tightly in her lap, the envelope Alexander had given her tucked safely in her clutch. Every so often, she felt his hand brush against hers, steady and reassuring. It no longer felt like a performance. It no longer felt like survival. It felt like belonging. When the vows were spoken and the ceremony ended, the reception began in a hall strung with roses and crystal chandeliers. Laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses filled the room. It was then that Alexander rose from his seat, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm but carrying warmth, "today we celebrate my brother's marriage, but I have something of my own to share." The room hushed. Alexander reached for Mia's hand and pulled her gently to her feet. She froze under the weight of every gaze, but his eyes anchored her. "When I introduced Mia as my wife, many of you questioned her. Many whispered about where she came from, about what she lacked. But what you fail to see is what she carries: strength, courage, and a heart unmatched by anyone I have ever known." A ripple of murmurs moved through the guests. Alexander's voice grew stronger. Yes, she came from hardship. Yes, she knew struggle. But it is not her past that defines her. It is the person she is now, and the person she chooses to be every day. And I am honored to stand beside her. Gasps echoed as Alexander turned, dropping to one knee in front of her. He pulled from his pocket a small velvet box, not the simple ring of their contract, but a new one, shimmering under the lights. "Mia," he said, his voice soft but certain. "What began as an agreement became the truth I never knew I needed. I do not want you as a pretend bride anymore. I want you as my wife, my partner, my equal, for life. Will you marry me, for real this time?" Mia's vision blurred with tears. She thought of the nights she had shivered under broken roofs, the moments she had nearly given up, the cruel voices that told her she would never be enough. And then she looked at Alexander, the man who had seen her, defended her, and chosen her against every expectation. Her voice trembled, but it rang clear. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The hall erupted in applause, some in shock, others in joy. Daniel raised his glass in a toast, smiling broadly. Even the doubters had no choice but to stand, clapping as Alexander slid the ring onto her finger. As the music swelled and Alexander drew her into his arms, Mia realized that the story of a homeless girl and a billionaire CEO was no longer about survival or pretense. It was about two souls who had found each other against every odd, who had turned a contract into a covenant, a lie into a truth, and a mistake into the best choice they had ever made. And as they kissed beneath the glow of chandeliers, the whispers fell silent. Their love was no longer a secret. It was a vow, sealed in front of the world.